salivary glands in this guy because they're like way back here because his head's so fat and they haven't pulled all this off yet. So we'll take a look. Yeah, we'll take a look. If you follow me around, if it's a skinny cat with a skinny head, they're really easy to see. But these big fat head guys.
But will it be on the practical though?
On a skinny cat, it'll be tagged.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll, like that one up front has good glands. That one has really good glands too. If it's on a skinny cat, you can see them. Okay, but you've got this big whale head here. All right, so this is our trachea, clearly. Okay, this is the top of the trachea. Right here you have these big flat pieces of cartilage on either side. Those are called the thyroid cartilages. And the bump on the front, that's the Adam's apple or the ventral median prominence. Okay, and then you can see the rings here. Okay, those are not complete rings, those are like little C-clamps of cartilage, and that just keeps the trachea stiff so it doesn't collapse.
Okay.
Okay, the only complete ring is the very first one right underneath this thyroid cartilage, right at the top. And that's the cricoid cartilage.
Cricoid?
Okay? Cricoid. It's the only complete ring. It goes all the way around. Okay? Then if we look behind the trachea, we have this tube here, and that is the esophagus. Okay, it's very tough, but it's very flexible because it has to expand and the bolus of food comes in. Okay, that lies quite neatly right behind the trachea. Okay, now this guy's trachea has been cut. So here is the opening to the trachea right there. Okay, that's called the glottis. And this little flap of skin right here, that's the epiglottis. So when you swallow, that actually folds down and covers that opening to the trachea, and it actually forces food down behind here, if I can open this up, down behind there, down into the esophagus. Okay, so that folds right over, covers that, and it actually directs the food back down into the esophagus. Okay? All right, they also want you to look for the phrenic nerves. So let's talk about those for a second. This right, slimy. This right here is the diaphragm, okay? The diaphragm seals off the chest from the abdomen. You have to keep the chest cavity sealed off so that you can change pressure, and that's how you breathe. When you inhale, your ribs come up and out. Your diaphragm is pulled down so that you increase volume. When you increase volume, you decrease pressure. You remember from your physics class? You decrease pressure, so air is drawn in. When you exhale, your ribs go down, your diaphragm snaps back up. Now you've decreased volume, when you increase pressure, forces the air out. So if I were to put a hole in your thoracic cavity, even if I didn't hit anything vital, you'd suffocate because you wouldn't be able to change pressure, so you wouldn't be able to breathe. So you need to plug up those holes right away. Okay? So in order to breathe, clearly we need to move our diaphragm up and down. So there has to be nerves that go to innervate that muscle. And the two nerves that innervate your diaphragm are your phrenic nerves. And this thing right here, by the way, is the heart. So we move the heart out of the way to the side here. Pull up on this. If you can see this, pull all this junk out of the way. See this right here? Oops. See this little string right here? See it's going right to the diaphragm? It actually runs all the way along the side of the heart. There's a lot of fat here, you can't really see it, but along the side of the heart, it comes up here, runs all the way up. That's the phrenic nerve. Okay, there's one on this side. And there was one on that side that is now broken, but here's the remnants of that string. See that on the other side? Right there. That one's been broken right there. Okay, so those are the phrenic nerves. Innervate the diaphragm so you can move the diaphragm up and down. Okay. They also tell you to look for the thymus gland. The thymus is a gland that, as you age, it's reabsorbed. It doesn't have any function, so the body just reabsorbs it. So if we were to open our chests, none of us would have a thymus gland anymore. And these older cats, they don't have thymus glands either. Unless you get a really young cat, you're not going to be able to see it. But it would be lying right in this area, just below the trachea, just above the heart. Okay, right in that space. Yeah. No.
Okay.
No, they're not. They're not.
One last thing.
Okay. All right. So if we follow our, having said all that about keeping this all sealed off, clearly our esophagus has to go to our stomach, and our stomach isn't in our chest; it's in our abdomen. So we have to be able to get through that diaphragm. So the esophagus, we pull this up. Here's our esophagus right here. Oh, good catch. Here's the esophagus right here, right? And it's going to go through the diaphragm right in that spot right there. I can't pull this up fast enough right here.
I'll send you guys
okay?
this.
That's called the hiatus. Where it goes through the diaphragm is called the
The hiatus.
Okay? And sometimes, especially like in preemies, that hiatus can rip, and then you have intestinal contents coming up into the thorax, and they have to go in and sew that up. It's called a hiatal hernia. Okay? But that's where the esophagus goes through, so if we look on the other side, in here, right here, there's the esophagus coming through on the other side. Right there. Okay? And that meets with this big J-shaped organ right here. This is the stomach. Okay? As soon as that bolus of food gets to the stomach, there is a ring of muscle called a sphincter at the end of the esophagus, so it's called the esophageal sphincter. That closes because you have a pH of about 2 in the stomach. So when you're churning around all that goo in the stomach, you don't want that washing back up onto the esophagus because it'll burn the esophagus, and that's reflux. Okay? So if we look in the stomach, you can see there's all these ridges in here. See those? Those are the rugae. And the rugae allows for expansion. The stomach has to have some extra tissues that'll expand, right? So those are the rugae. Also in the stomach, there are cells that produce the gastric juice, which is primarily hydrochloric acid, and there are cells that produce mucus. The inside of the stomach is lined with a thick layer of mucus, and that's to protect the stomach lining from the acid. And sometimes if you have a diet that's high in salt, or you're a big drinker, or you take a lot of over-the-counter medication.
What happens with an ulcer now?
Those things accelerate the breakdown of the mucus, and it breaks it down faster than you can repair it. And so that will allow that acid to hit that stomach lining, and that's an ulcer. Very painful. Potentially life-threatening if it turns into a bleeding ulcer because you don't know you're bleeding. You can bleed out internally. All right, so let's say we don't have any of that going on here. We put the food in here, it's all nice, it's all getting mushed up and gooed up with the acid. The next stop for that is going to be the small intestines, right? The food goes from the stomach into the small intestines. Problem number 1, the small intestines is not lined with mucus. The pH of that stuff coming out of there is about 2. So we need to, first thing we need to do is we have to neutralize that acid somehow. Okay? And we also have to regulate flow because you don't want all of that acidic stuff going out in one big flood into the small intestines. Okay? So we regulate flow by right at the end of the stomach, and I'm not sure why it's green in this guy, but right at the end of the stomach, right here.
That's what we've come to conclude, yes.
Maybe, is another sphincter muscle. That's called the pyloric sphincter. And that's going to regulate flow from the stomach to the small intestines so that it only comes out like in little spurts. And as soon as you get a spurt of that acid goo going into the intestines, we're going to neutralize it. And neutralizing it is the job of the pancreas. This thing right here, this big thing right here, looks like beef teriyaki. That's spleen. Oh. That's spleen. It's not a digestive organ.
I'm never going to forget that on the practice.
It's right there.
Beef teriyaki.
Your spleen, okay. Spleen, this is all spleen tissue here. The spleen is a glandular organ, so it's kind of fragile, and people go in and mess with it. It kind of gets all mushy. But the spleen, the pancreas runs from the spleen, under the stomach, over to... I lost my intestines here. Over to the small intestines. So this is actually all pancreas tissue right here and right here. Okay, it's a little hard to see in this cat, but this is all pancreas. Okay? So the pancreas, the digestive function of the pancreas is to produce digestive enzymes, and it's going to deliver all those digestive enzymes in a very alkaline solution, a very basic solution. So you get a squirt of that acid chyme coming in,
Neutralizes
I get a squirt of pancreatic juice coming in. So that it's kind of a twofer. It neutralizes the acid and it brings in all those digestive enzymes.
So, just to recap, that's the spleen going
This
under?
is the spleen right
Oh,
here.
that's the spleen.
The spleen's easy to pick out. That's the thing that looks like teriyaki. The pancreas tissue in this guy is kind of chewed up here a little bit.
Okay. But it's underneath?
It's underneath the stomach, and it runs from the spleen across over onto the small
Okay,
intestines.
okay. Thanks.
Okay? Also coming in right at the beginning of the small intestines is bile. So if we go back up here for a minute. So again, here's our diaphragm, right? And here is our liver. And if you'll notice, you have this ligament right here. This is called the falciform ligament, and that just serves to hold that liver up under the diaphragm. Okay? So this is all liver. You don't have to know about the lobes and all that stuff. Just be able to recognize it as liver. And then you have this nasty-looking greenish-black deflated sac right here. That's the gallbladder. Okay? So the liver produces bile salts. Those salts are stored in the gallbladder. Okay? They are going to be delivered to the small intestines. So they come out through a duct right here. That's called the cystic duct or the bile duct. Okay? And they are also joined by ducts coming in from the liver itself. These are hepatic ducts. And all of those things combine into one big tube, which you can see right here. Okay? This is the common bile duct, and you see it's coming right at the beginning of the small intestines as well. And that's going to bring in some enzymes from the liver and the bile. And bile is an emulsifier. Right? It breaks up big fat globs into tiny little droplets so that you can digest it properly. Okay? So all that stuff comes in right at the beginning of the small intestines. This first couple of inches, this is really chewed up here. This first little loop of small intestines, it's not too curly, first couple of inches, that's the duodenum. Okay? By the time that stuff reaches the end of the duodenum, chemical digestion is completed. Everything is broken down as much as we can break it down. So then we go into all this real curlicue part of the small intestines. This is the jejunum. And the rest of the small intestines now is for absorption. We broke it all down, now we need to absorb all those nutrients. So if we look at the mesentery here, the mesentery is all this tissue in here. You can see all those lovely blood vessels. So the nutrients are being absorbed through the microvilli and the villi into the capillaries and finally into these bigger blood vessels, and that all goes eventually to the liver and then out to the body. Okay, so that's the mesentery. And then the last little part of the small intestines where it joins the large intestines, this last little U here, this last little chunk here is the ileum. Okay, and the ileum attaches to the large intestines, which are right here. The large intestine is pretty easy to discern. It's much wider, much shorter. Okay, so where that small intestine, that ileum, joins the large intestine, there's a bump right here. That's actually a valve. That's called the ileocecal valve. That's going to regulate flow from the small intestines into the large intestines. And you also notice you have this little blind sac right here, this little dead end. That's the cecum. If this were a human, this is where our appendix would be hanging off of. They don't have an appendix, they have a cecum. Okay? And if we put this in relatively like it's supposed to be in the cat, okay, just like us, this is where our appendix would be, way down here in this quadrant, right? This is the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. And the descending colon is held up against the back body wall by this tissue here. This is called mesocolon, and that just keeps that in that orientation so you don't get kinks. That would be bad. Kinks are bad. Kinks are bad. And the function of the large intestines, we know, is to reabsorb water. And you also have a nice healthy colony of bacteria that is in your large intestines. Those bacteria feed on whatever organic material is left by the time it gets there, and byproducts of their metabolism are vitamins that we can't make for ourselves. So we have a mutualistic relationship with those bacteria. Okay? And then finally the waste comes to the rectum, which we can't see because we haven't opened up this part yet. The rectum for storage and compaction, and then finally elimination through the anus. Okay? Good? A lot of information.